Part 1. Welcome to Bullyville. Chapter 1. City Gates. The most pressing environmental problem we face today is not climate change. Rather, it's pollution in the public square, where a smog of adversarial rhetoric, propaganda, and polarization stifles discussion and debate, creating resistance to change and thwarting our ability to solve our collective problems. James Hogan, David Suzuki Foundation Chair, author of I'm Right and You're an Idiot. I no longer feel compelled to work for the community, said a rural mayor with a likeness to St. Nick in his very public midterm 2018 resignation letter. I actually feel ill every time I return to town and sick to my stomach to attend council meetings. I'm not able to sleep at night due to worrying because of the divisiveness. It's affecting my health, and I won't suffer any longer. This resignation, which the mayor stated was due to the actions and behavior of a certain portion of the community that had poisoned the workings of council, was followed by the resignations of 2 other municipal council members. What made the mayor's resignation especially troubling was the fact that he had diligently served the same community for 30 years, 14 years as an elected representative. The only thing that had changed was political culture over time. Like the canary in the mine, he grew weary from the toxic fumes. The end result? An experienced leader was lost, the governance and effectiveness of a local government was shaken, and a community was left behind, further divided. If this was the experience of only 1 or 2 or even a handful of communities with unique governance challenges or social issues, it could be chalked up as personally tragic for those involved. The trouble is, we are seeing a sharp rise in incivility and bullying in our communities everywhere, stifling democratic debate, paralyzing municipal councils, costing precious resources and tax dollars, and hampering the proper and effective functioning of local government. A 1946 documentary made by Encyclopedia Britannica in collaboration with Yale University to educate citizens after the war about the importance of guarding and preserving their local democracies nicely sums up why this is a problem for all of us. What happens in a single community is the problem of its own citizens, but it is also the problem of us all because as communities go, so goes the nation. Enter at your own risk. And so goes the nation indeed. Municipal politics today is too often characterized by shocking and very public breaches of acceptable conduct by elected officials, staff, and citizens. Barely a day goes by without another damning headline. Councillors behaving badly. Toxic council relationships damaging the town. Harassment report proves city has workplace culture problem. Angry group confronts CAO at home. CAO charged with defrauding town. Mayor appeals to the voters after review finds he harassed and bullied female staff. CAO resigns over council behavior. Delay in addressing workplace racism, slap in the face, says councillor. Toxic city hall led by paranoid mayor. That's only a small sample of recent Canadian headlines and doesn't include the heightened shenanigans such as accusations of voter fraud, defamation, vandalism, and theft, among other toxic actions in the public square that transpire during local elections. Besides eroding public trust and creating costly organizational paralysis, this toxicity is an unhealthy development for our local democracies. We know the quality and diversity of candidates running for office suffers. For the less socially secure you are, the less likely you are to subject yourself to the politics of the snake pit. Existing and experienced politicians are deterred from seeking a second term. Low voter turnout is chronic, with about a quarter of eligible U.S. city voters and about half of Canadian eligible city voters casting a ballot. The situation only worsens as media outlets are consolidated and local news coverage diminishes. An election by acclamation remains high. Many jurisdictions have more positions filled by acclamation than by elections. We need an active democracy and active citizens to solve these problems, says CEO Craig Pollitt of the municipalities of Newfoundland and Labrador, where elections by acclamation are over 55%. In the most recent elections, a quarter of all provincial municipalities had to extend their nomination period because there were no candidates coming forward to fill vacant seats. Nobody's coming to solve these problems for these towns. They need to find solutions themselves. One of the ways you do that is by engaging in a healthy debate around policies and directions. That's the role elections play. The challenges facing communities and local governments today are formidable. In days gone by, when resources seemed abundant, public trust was high, and continual expansion of services was an expected norm, citizens were, for the most part, somewhere between happy and complacent. Today, the reality is very different. Heightened pressures and challenges, including a ballooning infrastructure deficit, critical infrastructure at or nearing end of its life, public trust at an all-time low, the retirement of waves of experienced municipal employees leaving operational vacuums, the declining activity of civil society associations and volunteerism, an increasingly stringent regulatory environment, greater economic disparity, unprecedented financial pressures, an affordable housing crisis, a mental health crisis, the accumulation of increased responsibilities on municipalities, lack of public understanding of the role, resources, and processes of local government, heightened public expectations for engagement and involvement in decision making, and the need to prepare for climate change, including straining local resources to manage today's windstorms, flooding, and wildfires. These are all complex problems that require community leadership, innovation, collaboration, and consistency to address. All of this at the very time when we seem to have lost the art of living and working well together to accomplish our common goals. Dimming democratic lights. The very fact that it is popular nowadays to preface all types of civic and organizational activity, including business activity, with the word sustainable, is an acknowledgement that our current course is at best missing the mark, if not headed towards even greater crisis. We have sustainable community building, sustainable leadership, sustainable employment, sustainable living, sustainable growth, sustainable development, sustainable economy, and the list goes on. This trend is a polite, non-threatening way to admit what the renowned author and evangelist of healthy communities, Jane Jacobs, prophetically argues in her 2004 book, Dark Age Ahead. Namely, that our cities are on the brink of a new dark age, a period of what she calls cultural collapse. Jacobs writes that this is evidenced in the serious decay of key pillars of stable democratic society, including the decline of the family and households due to the unbearable economic and social pressures, the rise of consumerism and individualism, and the transformation of education into mere credentialism. She is no longer a lone voice. In his 2018 Year's Message, Canadian bestselling author of Deepening Community, Building Communities That Sustain Us, Paul Bourne, asks, as we enter into another chaotic year, do we dare optimism? Or do we embrace a growing sense that it is too late? Should we just let things unravel, focus on what is best for me, and watch it all come tumbling down? Bourne sounds the alarm bell on the shallow substitutes that now stand in the place of deep, meaningful community connection. An obligatory Facebook like rather than a meaningful get-together or dinner. Or worse, the rise of fear-based communities, dangerous places that thrive on the creation of enemies, or developing an us versus them mentality where animosity, isolation, and threats between neighbors are the norm rather than neighborly cooperation and enhancement. The signs in civil society are everywhere, the decline in the vitality or even the existence of many service clubs and organizations, the loss of purpose and governance challenges in so many nonprofit groups, and the difficulty inspiring or recruiting community members into action. Of course, there are many exceptions, but the trend is undeniable. Harvard professors and political scientists Stephen Levitsky and Daniel Ziblatt have, after years of studying the fall of democracies around the world, felt the need to turn their attention to home soil. In their 2018 book, How Democracies Die, they expressed their alarm at the prevalence of key indicators of collapse, including the increasing hostility in public discourse and weakening of critical institutional buffers in the face of heightening social, economic, and environmental challenges. They warn us that the litmus test of the decline of democracy, the one where the legitimacy of one's opponent is denied. We see this happening everywhere, from national politics down to local politics in small rural communities throughout Canada and the United States. Authoritarian politicians cast their rivals as criminal, subversive, unpatriotic, or a threat to national security or the existing way of life, says Levitsky. The drift into authoritarianism doesn't always set off alarm bells. Citizens are often slow to realize that their democracy is being dismantled, even as it happens before their eyes. Dangerous lullaby. Jane Jacobs warns us not to fall into the mass amnesia that characterizes the descent into a dark age, where people forget and fail to understand what they have lost, and therefore fail to fight to preserve it. She notes that during the last dark age, not only was most classical culture forgotten, but citizenship gave way to serfdom and feudal relations as the people sunk into poverty, ignorance, and squalor. In the final days before Western Rome's collapse, local governments had been expunged by imperial decree and were replaced by centralized military despotism. Today, we are once again seeing local governments that are unable to govern themselves effectively. In the United States, over 60 municipalities have gone bankrupt in the past few years alone. Entire democratically elected city councils are essentially fired, and administrators are put in place to manage the municipality. In Australia, over 100 Australian municipalities have been consolidated because they could not effectively manage their public assets and sustainably deliver services. Governance collapse in Canadian municipalities is also happening despite a robust financial reporting system and regulatory environment which sets limits on how much debt municipalities can take on and forbids running operating deficits. Midterm and often cluster resignations of council members has become a disturbing and growing trend, leaving some councils without a quorum to make decisions, not to mention the disruption and cost of holding by-elections. The investigations into widely publicized corruption in Quebec municipalities led to some, including the province's third largest city, being put under trusteeship. Misconduct included behavior so antithetical to the public service, such as verbal abuse, arbitrary suspensions, conflict of interest, and intrusions into the private lives of employees, that one can't be blamed for losing hope. Municipalities on the verge of governance collapse don't always look so on the outside. What the public doesn't necessarily see is the gap between mandated legislative requirements and the internal capacity of the administration to deliver, given the tsunami of pressures on councils and administrations that is only intensifying. Internal conflict, toxic councils, and polarized communities make matters so much worse. And like an organism, these three affect each other. Even if a local government is doing the right thing, for instance, the cultural conditions, public understanding, and heart of the people may be such that they don't appreciate those efforts and may even actively seek to undermine them. Hope rests in the crack where the light shines through. In democratic societies, that is the time and place when a community awakens to the fact that it is collectively responsible for its own destiny. This experience led me over time to think deeply about the nature of cultural transformation in democratic societies and to review the wisdom of our rich democratic community-building tradition. The Athenian lawmaker Solon, who was credited with paving the way for democracy, used poetry to lament and warn of the city being under threat from the unrestrained greed and arrogance of its citizens. Greek philosopher Plato told us that the city is what it is because the citizens are what they are. The French aristocrat and political philosopher Alexis de Tocqueville prescribed a new political science that considers the importance of maintaining and fostering the right mores or habits of the heart for democratic societies to remain healthy and just. The great culture shapers today are the entertainment and marketing industries, from the shows we watch to the music we listen to the lifestyle-shaping advertisements. However, these industries are accountable to no one except their shareholders. Too often, driving sales easily and quickly involves appealing to consumers' simplest appetites and ensuring that citizens see themselves as little more than consumers whose civic expression in the public square is little more than shopping well. For instance, virtually every human civilization has understood that inciting envy is unwise and divisive, yet marketers regularly encourage us to make your neighbors jealous by the purchasing of the latest patio set or new car. Values expressed in behavior becomes culture, a fact that we ignore at our great peril. Democracy's traditional counterbalance to misinformation, manipulation, and apathy was the free press, that truth-telling, fact-sorting machinery that keep the people free and independent by providing hard research, critical thinking, and quality information to the people. Unfortunately, the current state of media ownership, concentrated as it is in ever fewer hands and operating under market pressures that centralize news outlets, means that comprehensive news coverage of local issues is quickly becoming a thing of the past. Research shows that civic engagement, including voting in local elections, is higher where there is local municipal news coverage. The Public Policy Forum, a nonprofit think tank in Ottawa, showed in a recent report titled Mind the Gaps that City Hall reporting has declined by 38% in 20 small and mid-sized Canadian cities from 2008 to 2017. The decline is just as dramatic in the United States and the United Kingdom. To this end, the BBC is funding local democracy reporters. In the U.S., private foundations have promised $20 million to help local news organizations become sustainable. In Canada, $50 million was committed to be spent over 5 years in the 2018 federal budget to support local journalism across the country, with a recommendation that news agencies be made eligible for nonprofit status. American political commentator and journalist Bill Moyers succinctly describes the quality of democracy and the quality of journalism as deeply intertwined.